I'm Jessica, 26 female. I live in a small, one-bedroom apartment in the city, the kind of place where you can hear your neighbors arguing about what to watch on TV. By day, I'm an architectural drafter, spending my hours hunched over blueprints, making sure every line and measurement is perfect because in my world, precision is everything. That apartment, the one I'm in now, is a rental, a temporary space that never quite felt like home, especially after I lost the only real home I ever knew. This isn't just a story about losing a piece of property. It's about how the person who was supposed to protect me, my own mother, forged my name on a piece of paper and sold my future right out from under me, all for the sake of my younger sister. It's about how I had to take that betrayal and drag it into the sterile, unforgiving light of a courtroom to get back what was mine. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My dad, Richard, was my anchor. He was a quiet man, a carpenter by trade, and his hands, though calloused and rough, could create the most beautiful, intricate things from simple blocks of wood. He smelled of sawdust and varnish, a scent I still associate with safety and love. He and my mother, Diane, were polar opposites. Where he was calm and steady, she was a whirlwind of social ambition and fleeting passions. She was an interior designer, obsessed with appearances, status, and ensuring our family looked perfect from the outside, even when things inside were cracking. They divorced when I was 16, a split that felt less like a sudden earthquake and more like the final, inevitable collapse of a structure that had been unstable for years. Dad never remarried. He poured his energy into his work and into me. My mother, however, married a man named George within 2 years and had my half-sister, Chloe. Chloe was born into a world I never knew, a world of private schools, designer clothes, and the constant, undivided attention of my mother. Diane saw Chloe as her second chance, a do-over, and she showered her with everything she had. I became a footnote in my mother's new, upgraded life. Phone calls became sporadic, visits felt like scheduled appointments, and I learned to rely on myself and my dad for everything. The apartment was Dad's pride and joy. It wasn't huge, but it was in a beautifully restored pre-war building downtown, with high ceilings, original hardwood floors, and a stunning view of the city park. He'd bought it years before the neighborhood became trendy, pouring his own labor into it, refinishing the floors, building custom bookshelves that fit perfectly into the wall nooks, and tiling the kitchen backsplash himself. It was more than an asset, it was a testament to his craftsmanship and his love for the city. "One day, Jessie," he'd told me, sitting on the balcony as we watched the sunset, "this will all be yours. It's your start, your foundation." When he got sick, it was fast. A diagnosis that left us reeling and a prognosis that gave us months, not years. During that time, he was meticulous about getting his affairs in order. He sat me down with his lawyer, Mr. Coleman, a kind, older man with a gentle voice who had handled our family's legal matters for decades. Dad's will was simple and clear. His savings and his tools would go to a local trade school to fund a scholarship for young carpenters. His car, an old but reliable truck, he left to me. And the apartment, free and clear of any mortgage, was also left solely to me. I remember my mother's reaction at the reading of the will. We were all in Mr. Coleman's stuffy office, me, Diane, and Chloe, who was scrolling through her phone, looking bored. When Mr. Coleman read the clause about the apartment, Diane's smile, which was already thin and stretched, vanished completely. "Just to Jessica?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Richard, you can't be serious. What about Chloe? What about his other daughter?" Mr. Coleman calmly explained that the will was ironclad and that my father's wishes were explicit. Chloe wasn't his biological daughter, and he had made his decision. Diane was furious. On the car ride home, she launched into a tirade. "It's not fair, Jessica. You get a whole apartment, $1 million property, and Chloe gets nothing. Your father was always selfish, always favored you." I tried to explain that it wasn't about fairness in her eyes, it was about Dad's wishes. He wanted me to have a secure start in life, something he had to work his entire life to achieve for himself. The apartment wasn't just money, it was his legacy to me. "I'll make sure Chloe is taken care of," I promised, thinking I could maybe help her with a down payment on her own place one day when I was financially stable. My mother just scoffed. "A little handout? That's not the point. The point is the disrespect." After that, a tense quiet settled between us. I moved into the apartment, every corner of it a memory of my dad. His favorite worn armchair was still in the living room, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco clinging to the fabric. I kept his workshop in the small second bedroom exactly as he'd left it. Living there felt like I still had a piece of him with me. I was grieving, but I was also grateful. I was 24, just starting my career as a drafter, and owning a home outright was a gift of unimaginable proportions. It meant freedom from rent, the ability to save, to build a future my dad would be proud of. My mother would occasionally make comments, passive-aggressive jabs about how lucky I was, or how Chloe was struggling to pay rent on her tiny studio while I was living in a palace. Each comment was a small paper cut, a reminder that in her eyes, my inheritance was an injustice to her favorite child. I tried to ignore it, focusing on my work and on building my new life in the home my father had left me. I thought her resentment would fade with time. I had no idea it was festering, growing into something far more destructive. The first year in the apartment was a blur of grief and gratitude. I settled into a routine, my life finally feeling like it had a stable foundation. My best friend, Maya, who worked grueling shifts as a nurse, would often come over after work, and we'd sit on the balcony, sharing a bottle of wine and talking for hours. She was the only one who truly understood how much the apartment meant to me, not as a property, but as a sanctuary built by my father's hands. "He's still with you here," she'd say, and I'd nod, feeling the truth in her words. My relationship with my mother, Diane, remained strained. She'd call, and the conversation would inevitably drift to Chloe. Chloe was trying to launch her career as a social media influencer, which apparently required a constant influx of cash for designer clothes, exotic trips, and camera equipment. "It's an investment in her future, Jessica," Diane would say, her voice laced with a familiar, pleading tone. "She just needs a little boost to get started." I helped where I could, sending Chloe a few $100s here and there for her birthday or holidays, but it was never enough. The requests became more frequent, more demanding. Diane once asked me to take out a line of credit on the apartment to fund Chloe's trip to Bali to create content. I refused, politely but firmly. "Mom, I can't do that. Dad left me this place so I would be secure. Going into debt for a vacation isn't security." The anger in her voice was palpable. "It's not a vacation, it's her career. You just don't understand because you have your safe little job and your free apartment. You have no idea what it's like to struggle." The conversation ended with her hanging up on me. After that, her calls became less frequent, and when she did call, her tone was cold and distant. I was hurt, but I was also relieved to be free from the constant pressure. The deception began subtly. A few months after the argument about the loan, my mother called me, her voice uncharacteristically sweet. "Hi, darling. I know we've had our differences, but I was thinking, I need to update some of my own financial records for my business, and my accountant is asking for copies of all family estate documents. It's just a formality. Could you possibly send me a copy of the deed and the title transfer for your apartment? Just so I have it for my files." I hesitated. It seemed like an odd request. "Why would your accountant need my deed, Mom?" She had a ready answer. "It has to do with family assets and potential inheritance taxes on my end down the line. It's all very complicated legal stuff. It would really help me out." I was still naive enough to want to believe my mother had good intentions. I wanted to repair our fractured relationship. Reluctantly, I agreed. I scanned the documents, the official deed with my name on it, the certificate of title, and the section of my dad's will bequeathing the property to me, and emailed them to her. "Thank you, sweetie," she'd texted back. "You're a lifesaver." I felt a small sense of relief, thinking maybe this was an olive branch. A few weeks later, another strange request came. "Jessica, honey, I'm so sorry to bother you again," she said over the phone. "My new assistant must have spilled coffee on those documents you sent. The signatures are all smeared. Could you do me a huge favor and just sign a blank property transfer form for me? I'll fill in the details from the originals. It's just to have a clean copy for the file. I can swing by and pick it up." This time, alarm bells started ringing in my head. A blank, signed form? Absolutely not. "Mom, I'm not comfortable with that at all," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "I can send you fresh copies of the originals, but I will not sign a blank document. That's incredibly irresponsible." Her sweet facade crumbled instantly. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Jessica, stop being so dramatic. Do you think I'm trying to steal from you? I'm your mother. I'm just trying to get my paperwork in order. You're so untrusting." The guilt trip was a classic Diane maneuver, but this time it didn't work. I stood my ground. "No, Mom, I'm sorry." She slammed the phone down. I didn't hear from her for a month after that. I told Maya about the conversation, and she was immediately suspicious. "Jess, that's not just weird, that's a massive red flag," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "Do not give her anything else, and maybe think about putting your important documents in a safe deposit box." I agreed, but part of me still felt guilty, wondering if I had overreacted. Had I unfairly judged my own mother? The final piece of her plan fell into place without me even realizing it. She showed up at my apartment one evening, unannounced, holding a piece offering a box of pastries from my favorite bakery. She was apologetic, saying she had been under a lot of stress with her business and Chloe's struggles. "I was out of line to ask you to sign that form," she said, her eyes welling up with what I now know were crocodile tears. "Can you forgive me?" I wanted to believe her so badly. I let her in, and we sat and talked for an hour. She seemed like her old self, asking about my work, complimenting what I'd done with the apartment. As she was leaving, she said, "Oh, I have a package for you that was delivered to my house by mistake. It's in my car. Could you just sign for it on my delivery scanner? The driver needs a signature." She held out a small electronic device, the screen showing a familiar signature box. It seemed innocuous enough. I scribbled my name, Jessica Riley, with the stylus. She smiled, thanked me, and left. I never received a package. I later learned that there was no package. She had used a signature capturing app. She now had a perfect, high-resolution digital copy of my signature. Life returned to a fragile normalcy for the next 6 months. I didn't hear much from Diane, which I took as a sign that she had finally accepted my decision and moved on. Chloe's social media presence was booming. Her posts were filled with images from luxurious locations, sponsored products, and a lifestyle that seemed impossibly lavish. I felt a pang of resentment, knowing my mother was likely funding it, but I pushed the feeling down. It wasn't my business. I had my own life to focus on, my own career to build. I was working on a major project at my firm, a new community arts center, and the long hours were consuming. For the first time, I felt like I was truly standing on my own 2 feet, building a future on the foundation my father had given me. The day my world fell apart started like any other Tuesday. It was late autumn, and the air had a crisp chill. I came home from work exhausted, my mind still buzzing with building codes and spatial calculations. As I walked down the hallway to my apartment, number 7B, I saw a piece of paper taped to my door. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope with official-looking text visible through the window. My first thought was that it was a notice from the building management about maintenance or a fire drill. Annoyed at the tape on my door, I pulled it off and unlocked the deadbolt, tossing my keys and the letter onto the small entryway table. I made myself a cup of tea, changed into comfortable clothes, and finally sat down to open the envelope. The words on the page seemed to swim before my eyes, refusing to make sense. It was a formal notice, printed on the letterhead of a property management company I'd never heard of. It was addressed to current occupant. "This letter serves as a formal notice of eviction," it began. "As per the sale of the property located at my address, completed on October 15th, the new owners require vacant possession of the premises. You have 30 days from the date of this notice to vacate the property. All personal belongings must be removed by December 1st. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I read it again, and a third time. Eviction, sale of the property, new owners, it had to be a mistake, a scam. Maybe they put it on the wrong door. I checked the address. It was correct. I looked at the date of the sale, October 15th. That was 3 weeks ago. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. A cold dread, slick and oily, washed over me. This was impossible. I owned this apartment. My father left it to me. The deed was in my name. I had never spoken to a real estate agent, never listed the property, never signed a single document. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and dialed my mother's number. She was a real estate agent before she became an interior designer. She would know if this was some kind of elaborate fraud. She answered on the third ring, her voice brig. HT and cheerful. "Jessica, what a surprise. How are you, darling?" "Mom," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "I got a letter, an eviction notice. It says the apartment was sold. It has to be a mistake, right? Some kind of prank." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was only a second, but it felt like an eternity. In that single moment of silence, I knew. The cheerfulness in her voice when she finally spoke was gone, replaced by a cold, defensive tone. "Oh, that! I was meaning to talk to you about that." "Talk to me about what?" I cried, my voice rising with panic. "What is going on?" "Now, don't overreact, Jessica," she said, her voice infuriatingly calm. "I did what had to be done. Chloe needed the money. Her career is taking off, and she had a major investment opportunity. It was for the family." The words hit me like physical blows. I couldn't breathe. "What did you do?" I whispered, already knowing the answer. "You sold it." "I sold it," she confirmed, her tone matter of fact. "It was for the best. That apartment was too much for you anyway, and you never truly appreciated it. Chloe needed it more." "Appreciated it? It was Dad's. He left it to me." I was screaming now, tears streaming down my face. "How could you sell it? You can't. It's in my name." "The paperwork says otherwise," she said coolly. "It was all perfectly legal." "How?" I choked out. "How could it be legal? I never signed anything." "Your signature was on the transfer of deed, Jessica. It's all filed with the city. There's nothing you can do about it." And then it hit me, the request for the documents, the story about the smeared signatures. The package she'd had me sign for on that little electronic pad. It wasn't a delivery scanner. She had captured my signature. My own mother had orchestrated a meticulous, calculated plan to steal my home, the home my father had built for me, the foundation of my entire future. She had taken the deed I'd emailed her, used a template to create a fraudulent transfer document, digitally affixed the signature she had stolen from me, and filed it. She had used her knowledge of the real estate world to navigate the system, to make the unthinkable happen. "I'm going to call the police," I sobbed. "You can do what you like," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "But it's your word against a legally filed document. Think about what's best for the family, Jessica. Don't make a scene." And then she hung up. I sat there on my floor, the eviction notice crumpled in my fist, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. Every object I looked at, the bookshelves Dad built, the chair he sat in, the floors he polished, was no longer mine. I was a stranger in my own home. My mother hadn't just sold a property. She had stolen my father's memory, my security, and my trust in the one person who should have been my staunchest protector. The grief I felt was a cold, hard knot in my chest, but underneath it, a new feeling began to smolder. Rage. A pure, white-hot rage that burned away the tears. She thought I would just roll over and accept it. She thought I wouldn't make a scene. She was wrong. The 24 hours after that phone call were a black hole of shock and despair. I didn't sleep. I just walked through the apartment, touching the walls, the furniture, as if to memorize it before it was ripped away from me. The eviction notice on the table felt like a ticking bomb. My first instinct was to call the police and report the theft, but my mother's chillingly confident words echoed in my head. "It's your word against a legally filed document." I realized she was right. A hysterical phone call with accusations of forgery against my own mother would likely be dismissed as a family squabble. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. The next morning, with eyes red-rimmed from crying and a stomach churning with a toxic mix of fear and fury, I called the only person I knew I could trust completely, Maya. When I explained what had happened, her calm, professional nurse's demeanor took over. "Okay, Jess, breathe. We're not going to panic. We're going to be methodical," she said, her voice a steady anchor in my storm. "First things first, you need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a good one, an estate lawyer." And that's how I found myself back in the office of Mr. Arthur Coleman, the man who had read my father's will. He looked older than I remembered, his face etched with deeper lines of concern as I laid out the whole sordid story, my voice breaking as I recounted the conversation with my mother. I handed him the eviction notice. He read it carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each line. When I finished, he didn't offer platitudes or sympathy. He looked at me over the top of his spectacles and said, "This is grand larceny and forgery, Jessica. What your mother has done is a serious felony. But she's right about one thing: we need more than just your word. We need a paper trail." That day, Mr. Coleman became my general, and I became his soldier. He outlined our strategy. The first step was to go to the city records office and pull every single document related to my property filed in the last year. "We need the fraudulent deed of transfer she filed," he explained. "We'll compare the signature on that document to your real signature. We'll need to hire a forensic handwriting expert." That afternoon, I went to the records office. The bureaucratic slowness was maddening. I filled out forms, waited in lines, and finally a clerk handed me a thick file. My hands trembled as I opened it. There it was, a quitclaim deed, dated October 14th, transferring ownership of the property from Jessica Riley to Diane Fowler. And at the bottom, a near-perfect forgery of my signature. Seeing it there, on an official document, made me feel physically ill. It was a digital copy, slightly pixelated upon close inspection, exactly as if it had been lifted from another source and pasted on. It was the signature from the delivery scanner. Attached to the deed was the name of the notary public who had supposedly witnessed my signing, a woman named Patricia Bell. Mr. Coleman's instructions were clear. "Find out if this notary is real. Find out if she's connected to your mother." A quick online search revealed that Patricia Bell was a legitimate notary. It also revealed that she worked for a title company that my mother's interior design firm used almost exclusively for their property staging contracts. The connection was immediate and damning. Our next step was to investigate the sale itself. The buyer was listed as a generic-sounding LLC. "Shell Corporation," Mr. Coleman muttered when I showed him the paperwork. "Standard practice for buyers who want anonymity, but they still had to pay for it. We need to follow the money." This was harder. Accessing bank records required legal authority. Mr. Coleman explained that our first official move would be to file a civil lawsuit against my mother for fraud and theft, and against the LLC to contest the sale. This would grant us subpoena power. While he prepared the lawsuit, he tasked me with gathering evidence of my mother's motive. "Why did she need the money so desperately?" he asked. "You mentioned your sister. Dig into that." It felt disgusting, like I was a spy in my own family, but I did it. I spent hours scrolling through Chloe's social media. Her life was a curated fantasy of five-star hotels, $1,000 handbags, and champagne brunches. But I noticed something else. She was constantly tagging a specific brand of high-end cosmetics in her posts. A little more digging revealed that she wasn't just an influencer for this brand. She was trying to become a regional distributor for their multi-level marketing scheme. The buy-in cost was astronomical, hundreds of thousands of dollars for the initial inventory and licensing rights. Then I found it, a post from Chloe dated October 16th, the day after the apartment sale was finalized. It was a picture of her signing a contract, a beaming smile on her face. The caption read, "Dream come true, Sparkle's officially a founding partner in my own luxury beauty business. Huge thanks to the best mom in the world for believing in me and making this happen. Onwards and upwards, Boss Babe Entrepreneur." The date was the smoking gun. My mother had sold my inheritance to fund my sister's pyramid scheme. The investment opportunity she'd mentioned on the phone wasn't just a vague hope. It was a concrete, six-figure buy-in. I saved screenshots of everything: Chloe's posts, the dates, the company information. I compiled a timeline, matching her expenses with my mother's increasingly desperate requests for money. The picture that emerged was one of profound financial recklessness. My mother and her new husband had clearly been living beyond their means to support Chloe's extravagant lifestyle, and they had run out of road. My apartment wasn't just an asset to them, it was a lifeline, a bailout. Armed with the fraudulent deed, the notary's connection to my mother, and the clear financial motive, I went back to Mr. Coleman's office. I laid it all out on his desk. He reviewed everything in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up at me. "She didn't just forge your signature, Jessica," he said, his voice low and serious. "She would have had to commit perjury by having a notary fraudulently attest to witnessing your signature. This moves it from a simple civil case to a criminal one. The district attorney's office will be very interested in this. Are you prepared for that? This could send your mother to prison." I thought of my dad. I thought of his calloused hands, the love he poured into every floorboard of that apartment. I thought of his last wish for me to have a secure future. Then I thought of my mother's cold, dismissive voice on the phone, telling me not to make a scene. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Di, I'm prepared." The decision to proceed with criminal charges felt like stepping off a cliff. Once Mr. Coleman contacted the district attorney's office, things moved with a speed that was both terrifying and validating. The Economic Crimes Unit took over the investigation, and a detective named Miller was assigned to my case. He was a no-nonsense man in his 50s with tired eyes that had clearly seen every kind of human ugliness. Our first meeting was in a small, sterile interview room. I walked Detective Miller and the assistant district attorney, a sharp woman named Ms. Alvarez, through the entire story. I provided them with my binder of evidence: the forged deed from the city records, the screenshots of Chloe's social media posts, the timeline of my mother's requests for money, and the information linking the notary, Patricia Bell, to my mother's business. I also gave them a dozen samples of my real signature from bank checks, my driver's license, and work documents. The difference between my fluid, handwritten signature and the pixelated, static image on the deed was obvious, even to an untrained eye. Detective Miller listened intently, taking notes without saying much. When I finished, he looked at Ms. Alvarez, who nodded grimly. "We have enough to open a formal investigation and execute warrants," she said. The first warrant was for the notary, Patricia Bell. 2 days later, Detective Miller called me. "We paid Ms. Bell a visit," he said. "She folded like a cheap suit. Said your mother paid her $5,000 in cash to notarize the deed without you being present. She kept a detailed logbook, and on the date in question, she was notarizing documents at a real estate closing 50 miles away. Her log and her travel receipts confirm she was nowhere near you or your apartment. She's agreed to testify against your mother in exchange for a plea deal." The next set of subpoenas went to the banks. Mr. Coleman's civil suit and the DA's criminal investigation running in parallel meant we were attacking from two fronts. We got access to my mother's financial records, and they told a story of desperation. She was deeply in debt, with maxed-out credit cards and a second mortgage on her own home. Then, on October 15th, there was a massive wire transfer into her account for $1.2 million, the proceeds from the sale of my apartment. The very next day, a wire transfer for $250,000 went out from her account to the MLM cosmetics company Chloe was involved with. Another $50,000 was transferred directly to Chloe's personal bank account. The money trail was a straight, clear line from my inheritance to my sister's business venture. The final piece was the LLC that had purchased the apartment. The DA's office pierced the corporate veil, and it turned out to be a foreign investment group with no connection to my mother. They were a legitimate buyer who had been deceived as well. They had purchased the property in good faith, believing my mother was my legal representative. This was actually good news for my civil case. Mr. Coleman explained that since they were a bona fide purchaser, we couldn't simply evict them. However, we could sue my mother for the full value of the property, plus damages. The eviction notice was put on hold by a court order once we filed the civil suit, a temporary injunction pending the outcome of the criminal case. It was a small victory, but it meant I didn't have to pack my bags just yet. The day my mother was arrested, I was at work. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. It was my sister, Chloe. Her voice was a hysterical shriek. "Jessica, what did you do? The police are here. They're arresting Mom. You did this." I could hear my mother in the background telling her to be quiet. I didn't say anything. I just listened to the chaos I had unleashed. "You're tearing this family apart," Chloe screamed before the line went dead. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking, and went to the bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and saw not a victim, but a fighter. Tearing the family apart? No, my mother had done that when she chose greed over her own daughter. I was just cleaning up the mess. Diane was charged with multiple felonies: grand larceny, forgery in the second degree, and offering a false instrument for filing. She was released on bail, and the trial was set for 3 months later. During that time, the full weight of my family's fury descended upon me. Aunts, uncles, and cousins called me, telling me I was heartless, that I should drop the charges, that family is family, and I should forgive her. They had all been fed a story by my mother that this was a terrible misunderstanding, that I had agreed to help Chloe and had simply changed my mind after the fact, trying to extort more money. Chloe posted vague, tearful videos about being betrayed by those closest to you and how haters were trying to bring her business down. It was isolating and painful. The only people in my corner were Maya and Mr. Coleman. Maya let me stay with her on the nights I couldn't bear to be in the apartment, surrounded by memories. Mr. Coleman was my rock, calmly preparing me for what was to come. He prepped me for the trial, for the questions the defense attorney would ask, for the character assassination they would attempt. "They're going to paint you as a bitter, jealous daughter who was resentful of her mother's new family," he warned. "They will try to make you seem unstable, unreliable. Your job is to remain calm and tell the truth. The facts are on our side." I steeled myself for the confrontation. My mother had made her choice. Now, I had to see mine through to the end. The courtroom was exactly as I had imagined it: imposing wood paneling, fluorescent lights that hummed faintly, and an air of solemnity that made my skin feel tight. I sat beside Ms. Alvarez at the prosecution's table, trying my best to ignore the gallery behind me where my mother's family, my family, were gathered, their glares like tiny daggers in my back. My mother, Diane, sat at the defense table, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Her lawyer had dressed her in a conservative beige suit, her hair styled simply. She was playing the part of a victim, a bewildered mother caught in a tragic misunderstanding. Chloe sat directly behind her, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, a perfect portrait of a devoted, grieving daughter. The trial lasted 3 days. Ms. Alvarez presented our case with methodical precision. She called the forensic handwriting expert who testified that the signature on the deed was a high-quality digital reproduction, not a live ink signature. He showed the jury, on a large screen, how the pixels distorted when magnified, a clear sign of a copy-and-paste job. He compared it to my real signatures, pointing out the natural variations in pressure and flow that were absent in the forgery. Next, she called Patricia Bell, the notary. On the stand, Patricia was nervous, constantly wringing her hands, but her testimony was damning. She told the court that Diane Fowler had been a client for years and had approached her with the proposition, offering her $5,000 in cash to look the other way and notarize a document without the signatory present. She admitted under oath that she had committed a crime and was testifying as part of a plea agreement. My mother's lawyer tried to discredit her, painting her as a liar trying to save her own skin, but the damage was done. The jury listened, their faces impassive but their eyes fixed on Patricia. Then came Detective Miller, who laid out the financial evidence. He presented the bank statements, the wire transfers, the clear, unambiguous line drawn from the sale of my apartment to the funding of Chloe's MLM business. The defense had no real way to counter the numbers. They were cold, hard facts. Finally, it was my turn to take the stand. My heart pounded as I walked past my mother, refusing to meet her eyes. I swore the oath and sat down, my hands trembling in my lap. Ms. Alvarez led me through my story gently, starting from my father's death and his final gift to me. I spoke about what the apartment meant, not as a monetary asset, but as the last piece of my dad I had left. I recounted my mother's escalating requests for money, her strange demand for my documents, and the ruse she used to capture my signature. When I described finding the eviction notice taped to my door, my voice cracked, and I had to pause to compose myself. Then came the cross-examination. My mother's lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Davies, approached me with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. His strategy was exactly what Mr. Coleman had predicted. He tried to paint me as a spoiled and ungrateful daughter. "Ms. Riley," he began, "isn't it true that you were resentful of your mother's new family, that you felt abandoned after she remarried?" "I was a teenager whose parents got divorced," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "It was a difficult time, but I loved my sister." "Loved her enough to see her dreams crushed?" he shot back. "Isn't it true that your mother came to you with a business proposal, a way for you to invest in your sister's future, and you refused?" "She asked me to take on debt against the home my father left me to fund what appeared to be a very risky venture," I corrected him. "I said no." He paced in front of the witness stand. "So you said no, and your mother, in her desperation to help her struggling daughter, took matters into her own hands. A mistake, perhaps. A misguided act of maternal love, certainly. But theft? Isn't it possible, Ms. Riley, that in your anger you're exaggerating what happened? That this is all just a family dispute that has spiraled out of control?" "She forged my signature," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. "She hired a notary to commit fraud. She sold my home wit, out my knowledge, and gave the money to my sister. That isn't a dispute, that is a crime." The final witness was my mother. She took the stand and delivered a tearful, Oscar-worthy performance. She claimed it was all a terrible misunderstanding. She said I had verbally agreed to sell the apartment to help Chloe, that I had given her permission to handle the paperwork, and that I must have forgotten giving her my signature for that purpose. She claimed my grief over my father's death had made me unstable and forgetful. "I love both my daughters," she sobbed, looking directly at the jury. "I would never, ever steal from Jessica. I was only trying to help my family stay afloat." During the prosecution's cross-examination, Ms. Alvarez was relentless. She walked my mother through the evidence, piece by piece. "If Jessica agreed, why did you have to pay Patricia Bell $5,000 to forge the notarization?" "It was a fee for her services, to expedite things," Diane mumbled. "A $5,000 cash fee for a standard notarization?" Ms. Alvarez raised an eyebrow. "And why, if Jessica had given you her signature for the deed, was it a pixelated digital copy and not a wet ink signature?" I don't know anything about that," my mother stammered. "The lawyers handled it." The lies were transparent. Each question chipped away at her facade, revealing the calculated deception underneath. By the end, she was no longer a grieving mother but a cornered liar. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they filed back in, I held my breath. The foreman stood up, cleared his throat, and looked at my mother. "On the charge of grand larceny, we the jury find the defendant guilty. On the charge of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of offering a false instrument for filing, we find the defendant guilty." A gasp went through the gallery. Chloe let out a theatrical sob. My mother just stared forward, her face ashen, all the fight gone out of her. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound, aching sense of relief, like a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about the truth. And for the first time in over a year, the truth had finally been heard. The sentencing happened 2 weeks later. The judge, an older woman with a stern but fair reputation, listened as my mother's lawyer pleaded for leniency, citing her age, her lack of a prior record, and her misguided maternal instincts. My mother read a prepared statement, full of remorse that sounded hollow and rehearsed. She apologized to the court, to the family she had embarrassed, and finally to me. Her eyes met mine across the courtroom, but I saw no genuine regret in them, only bitterness. Ms. Alvarez, in her closing remarks for the prosecution, was firm. She argued that this wasn't a simple family dispute. It was a calculated, sophisticated fraud that involved multiple felonies and a profound breach of trust. Ms. Fowler didn't just steal money, she stated. She stole her daughter's security, her inheritance, and the memory of her late father. A message must be sent that such actions have severe consequences. Judge agreed. She sentenced my mother, Diane Fowler, to 3 to 5 years in state prison. The length of the sentence was significant, reflecting the severity of the crimes. Chloe screamed as the bailiffs led our mother away. The rest of my extended family looked at me with pure hatred, as if I were the one who had put the handcuffs on her. I walked out of the courthouse alone, ignoring their whispered insults. The cold winter air felt clean, fresh. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. With the criminal trial concluded, the civil case was a straightforward matter. The court issued a summary judgment in my favor, voiding the fraudulent sale of the apartment. Because the buyers were a bona fide party who had acted in good faith, the law protected them from being summarily evicted. However, the judgment ordered my mother to pay restitution to me for the full market value of the apartment, plus legal fees and punitive damages. The total amount was staggering, well over $1.5 million. Of course, my mother didn't have that kind of money. She had spent a significant portion of it on Chloe's business, which had already failed, and the rest was gone. Her assets, including her own house which she co-owned with her husband, were seized to begin paying the judgment. They were forced to sell their home and most of their possessions. The life of luxury they had built was gone. Chloe, without her mother's financial backing, had to abandon her influencer dreams and get a real job, working as a cashier at a retail store. I received a portion of the money from the sale of her assets, but it was nowhere near the full value of the apartment. I never saw the rest, and I didn't expect to. The victory wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. The court gave me a choice. I could take the partial restitution and let the new owners keep the apartment, or I could use that money to essentially buy back the apartment from them at the price they paid, with the remainder of the judgment against my mother acting as a long-term debt she might never repay. For me, there was no choice. I took every cent I received from the liquidation of her assets, and with a small loan to cover the difference, I bought my home back. The day I signed the final papers and received the new, legitimate keys was the real victory. Walking back into the apartment after it was legally mine again was an emotional experience. It felt different. It was no longer just my father's legacy, it was my battleground, my victory. I spent the next few months reclaiming the space. I packed up the last of my dad's things from his workshop, donating his beloved tools to the trade school as he had wished. I repainted the walls, bought new furniture, and made the space my own. It was a way of closing a painful chapter and starting a new one. I have not spoken to my mother since the trial. She sends letters from prison sometimes, but I don't open them. They go straight into the trash. Chloe has sent me a few hateful text messages, blaming me for ruining her life. I blocked her number. My relationship with that side of my family is severed, and while there's a sadness to that, there is also peace. My life now is quiet, and I am grateful for it. I still work as a drafter, finding comfort in the logic and order of my blueprints. Maya and I still have wine on the balcony, which now has new chairs and a small herb garden I planted. Sometimes I look out at the city lights and think about my dad. I think he would be sad about what my mother did, but I know he would be proud of how I fought for myself, how I protected the foundation he left for me. She stole my signature, but she couldn't steal my strength. I took her to court not for revenge, but for reclamation. I reclaimed my home, my future, and my own name, and that is a foundation that no one can ever take from me again.